So this is going to be a discussion video about a few notable things that I am personally hoping to see in Larian's upcoming RPG, Divinity, but please continue this conversation down below in the comments with your own thoughts and ideas. We know that Larian loves to look at feedback, and there's no better time than now, this early in the game's development, to give it. I do want to quickly preface by stating that I am making this video with the assumption that this next Divinity game is going to be basically Baldur's Gate 3 on steroids with more innovation, etc. If you look at Larian's history, Original Sin 2 is Original Sin 1 on steroids, and then Baldur's Gate 3 is basically Original Sin 2 on steroids. So it's natural to assume that this next game will still contain that core Larian CRPG feel, but it's just going to take it to a new level. So there's really no need for me to bring up points such as wanting the world to be a sandbox world or, wanting it to be a CRPG style game, because that assumption is already, I would think, a given. So up first, non-human, non-elf companions. Now, don't get me wrong here. Baldur's Gate 3's companions are great. I love the cast. I love their stories. I love their personalities. I really don't have a ton of criticism to aim at them as individual companions. And clearly, players at large are very happy with what Larian did with them. But out of the cast of 10 of them, 8 out of the 10 fall into the human or elf category. Now, I love humans and I absolutely love elves, but man, I think not having some of the more off the beaten path, less humany, less romance, aesthetically pleasing races was a major missed opportunity in my opinion. I would have loved to see a badass dragonborn companion, and I was actually in disbelief that there was no dwarven companion, as dwarves are not really even an off the beaten path type of race. They're pretty standard and cliche for fantasy RPGs. Now, we do have to keep in mind that Baldur's Gate 3 does have different lore than Divinity. Forgotten Realms lore, which is BG3, the lore behind the races and species is extremely vast. There's so much to pull from, yet Larian didn't really tap into hardly any of it at all when it comes to companions. And yeah, some of that could have been for licensing reasons through Wizards of the Coast, but then again, if we look at Larian's Original Sin 1 game, Divinity Original Sin 1 from 2014, the 4 companions in that game, so not many, but the 4 of them, all of them are human. So there is kind of a little bit of a trend going on here with Larian, but I do have to give Larian some credit for Original Sin 2 though, because out of the 6 companions, there is of course a lizard, undead, and a dwarf, and then there's 2 humans and 1 elf. I think I'm getting that right. So they did kind of get into a little bit more variety for Original Sin 2.
As per your own testimony, you have the taste buds of a dung beetle, the fashion sense of a monkey in a clown suit, and your personal hygiene reminds one of a carcass rotting in the sun.
Now, by all means, keep the handsome, pretty humans and elves. I like them too, and I'm even fine with them being the majority of companions. It's probably a smart move, relatability reasons, etc. But I'm really hoping that in the next Divinity game, Larian adds in a little unconventional spice to mix it up a little bit, especially for those of us who don't necessarily care as much about romance in RPGs. Divinity lore is certainly not as vast as Baldur's Gate 3, like I said, but outside of humans and elves, we still have dwarves, orcs, lizards, and imps. And since it's Larian's own IP, they have the opportunity to kind of do anything that they want here, and they could even, make new races, or perhaps pull off of some of the old obscure lore and give us a Renari companion, or something a little bit more unknown and visually unique compared to your cliche human or elf. Since we're on the topic of companions, my second hope here for Divinity is that Larian will focus a little bit more on offering not only more, but also higher quality platonic relationship type content with the companions. So content that a player can clearly aim for or hope for without worrying too much about ending up face down, butt naked in a bed with the companion. Now, I'm not advocating to take away really anything from those of you who love BG3, the romance, etc., just the way that it is. I'm more so advocating for Divinity to still have all that sexy romance stuff and options, but I think it would also go a really long way for players like myself, and I know a lot of people share this as well, if Divinity was a game that could better recognize a player's preferences earlier in the game and then blossom on that. I'm happy with some characters, such as Astarion, being this flirtatious, thirsty, bisexual type character that maintains that vibe throughout the game, regardless of player preference. I wouldn't change a thing with Astarion. I like his character a lot, but I would have also appreciated if there were a few companions that more so clearly fell into the "this is going to be my boy" type category, and that also applies to wanting some of the female characters to be like this as well. Sure, have a few hit on me regardless of what I do. Some of them can be thirsty if they want, if that's going to be part of their personality. But generally speaking, the cast at large, I think, should be more player preference driven if they do actually choose to go with a player sexual or even pansexual type companion system. Now, I will admit Larian did some excellent work with many of the romantic-esque scenes in BG3, so by all means keep doing that in Divinity, but please also consider putting some more effort into offering scenes of similar quality that are instead focused on platonic friendship. Really quick example, a lot of you guys probably know of the scene where you and Gale, you do choose this optionally, but it's not really that clear. I'll admit that you're going to end up in the woods in a romance scene, or a romance feeling scene. But in this scene, you go off into the woods away from the party, and you and Gale kind of like brush up against each other, your hands, and you're gazing up at the stars. Like, it's a great scene. You can learn some things, etc. For the players that want that, I think that's great, but I think Larian should also offer alternate content, not in every case. The player has to earn this, just like they have to earn romance. They should offer alternate content that the player has earned through non-romantic approval for maybe a scene where you and Gale end up going fishing in the river and tossing back a few drinks and cracking jokes, a strictly platonic friendship building scene. I think scenes like that would go really far in the next Divinity game. And moving on, but not moving on from the topic of companions, this one will be pretty quick. I really liked how in Baldur's Gate 3, Shadowheart, for example, we had like some flashback scenes of some of the companions in the past, and seeing the companions in like this more movie-like form of their past, I thought was so cool. So I'm hoping for the next Divinity game that we can get some more of that when it comes to backstories for companions. It's not just strictly them telling you in the present. Once in a while, I'd love to see a scene play out where you watch that companion in the past, you know, going about their lives, something relevant to their story and their character. I thought it was so cool that they did that, like with Shadowheart in Baldur's Gate 3, and I want to see more of that. And you know what? I have one more request here that also deals with companions, and I promise we'll move on from companions, but companions are very important to party-based RPGs, especially Larian Studios RPGs. And this request is that this next Divinity game has an origin character that is similar to the Dark Urge in that it's kind of half origin, half customizable. I thought this was such a great idea for Baldur's Gate 3, and as someone who doesn't ever want to play an origin character at first, because I always want to have a custom experience, but I also feel like I should play an origin character because I want that, you know, that more detailed experience. The idea of having a half origin, half customizable character like the Dark Urge was such a cool idea, and I hope that they have one character that's like that for the next Divinity game, and perhaps that character can be like the canon story or represent the canon story more so than your custom character or, you know, one of the actual origin characters. Up next, crafting. So I'm really hoping that the next Divinity game, at the very least, goes kind of back to the original Sin 1 and 2 system, even though both games are different from each other in some ways. But in original Sin 1 and 2, you could craft, you could combine, there's like hundreds of things you can create when you combine items together, and you're really incentivized to loot things in the environment because you find recipes that tell you what you should combine or what you can combine to create really cool things. And I think the next Divinity game would benefit from having, you know, a crafting system at the very least on the level of original Sin 2. Baldur's Gate 3 only had the alchemy system, and I'm sure many of you guys like me picked up all these items that you thought were going to be used for, you know, blacksmithing and stuff like that, but once you made it to Act 2, you never found a place to use them. Then you get to the city and you're like, surely I'm going to be able to use these ingots at the blacksmith shop or whatever, and there's no use. All the items ended up just being mostly junk. I really hope the next Divinity game goes deeper into crafting, and I hope they use what people liked on the original Sin 1 and 2 games. I hope they use somewhat of a system similar to that, but of course improve on it, maybe explain things a bit better. In original Sin 1 and 2, there was a lot of items that you could go up to in the environment, such as an anvil. I think you can go up to a beehive, a well. There's all these items that you can click on and place items into that environmental object to then create something. There's a lot of cool systems in those games. A lot of players don't interact with it because it's not explained that well, but in the next Divinity game, if they can do something like that, improve upon it and make it a little bit more intuitive, I think it would be really awesome for Divinity. Up next, and I'm really interested in hearing what you guys think about this, but I think it would be super cool if Larian expanded on that third-person camera perspective that they offer in Baldur's Gate 3. So in Original Sin 1 and 2, you can zoom the camera in to see your character closer, but you're mostly staring at the ground. In Baldur's Gate 3, Larian allows the camera to come up a little bit so you can see further in front of your character, making it much more appealing to zoom in and try to immerse yourself in the world. I'm hoping for this Divinity game, Larian takes this to the next level and allows you to see even higher in front of you and possibly even the sky above. How cool would it be to be in, the next game and be in a city and be able to look up at the buildings while also still having the top-down view and whatever view that you want, but when you're running around to really be able to immerse yourself in the world like that and see everything around you. I think this is something Larian could pull off, and it might actually be the first CRPG to really ever do it to this degree that I'm talking about. And I think it would pull in so many eyes of people that maybe necessarily wouldn't have initially been interested in the game into wanting to check this game out, and it would make players like myself just so excited to really enter into the exploration of this Divinity game and really experience and immerse yourself in the world. I don't need first person perspective or anything like that, just the ability to pull that camera up a little bit and play it more like an action RPG when it comes to exploration. Would be so cool. It would be unique, and it wouldn't really, if you don't want to do that, you don't have to, so it wouldn't really affect you too much, but man, that would be so cool. Next, let's talk about puzzles. This is probably the most divisive request or hope that I have on this list for understandable reasons. Most of the things I've been asking for so far have just been adding on to previous things that Larian already has, so I don't think most of the stuff I've been asking for people would advocate against, but this subject might be a little bit more divisive. I want the next Divinity game to have puzzles. So Larian has a history of puzzles. Original Sin 1 and 2 have a ton of puzzles. Many of them are tied to the main story, etc. There's a lot of people that don't like them, and I understand why, but Larian has done some really cool, fun puzzles, in my opinion, and I hope that in the next Divinity game, they keep that alive. Now, with that said, I totally understand that they are a much bigger company now. They're selling to a much larger audience, and, having these crazy puzzles that are part of the main content is probably going to throw off a large amount of potential players. So I think they should do kind of what they did with Baldur's Gate 3 and keep the puzzles more so to the side for more obscure, challenging type content that not every player is necessarily forced to go through. Maybe a few puzzles that everyone's forced to go through, but the really tough, long ones, maybe keep them to the side. I think it would be so cool because Larian has some really interesting puzzle ideas. They clearly like puzzles themselves, and I would hate to see them scrap that in fears of, not necessarily, upsetting too many players. I think you can do it, and you can satisfy the OG fan base of the original Sin games, and also satisfy all the new players that came in from Baldur's Gate 3. I think you can make them both happy in this case. It's just got to be the more obscure side content that offers some of these puzzles versus the main quest itself. But Larian, let your creativity shine. Some of the puzzles they do are so cool. Some of them are pretty annoying too, though. Speaking of obscure content, my hopes for the next Divinity game is that Larian has plenty of obscure, off-the-beaten-path armor sets to be found. In Original Sin 1 and 2, this was just so much fun to pursue some of these armor sets. And a lot of the armor sets were super cool too, and they would give you some set bonus if you found all of the pieces. And many times, these would be associated with these side quests that you would have to find, and they're pretty challenging sometimes to try to figure them out. But players who put the time into, really exploring the environment and meticulously looting things, etc., would end up with these armor sets that other players who are just really quick with things would never ever come across, or players who didn't want to actually try to figure things out would never come across. I think it's really cool that they had a lot of that in Original Sin 1 and 2, and it really rewarded those players that want to explore everything and figure everything out on a map. I'm thinking of the Devourer set. You have I forget the name of the set, the Captain set, where it was a really cool green set with the hat, and when enemies come close to your character, it charms them. You have the Tyrant set where you put on one piece and it looks really cool and it's really powerful, but you're cursed until you end up finding all 5 pieces or 4 pieces, and then the curse no longer applies and you have to figure that out as a character. So many cool, fun extra activities to really power up your character in Original Sin 1 and 2, and I want them to continue that with with the next Divinity game. perhaps my biggest hopes for the next Divinity, and I feel like it's probably a given that Larian will do this, but considering that they have, is it 6 Divinity games now and haven't really done it with any of them, even though they were closer to it with Original Sin 1 and 2, I really hope that Larian truly establishes the world building and lore of the Divinity franchise, gives us a true world map so we can see everything, establishes what is canon, and really corrects any of the missing or incorrect lore in the past. I really hope that this is the game that really makes Rivellon a true world building setting that we can all look forward to for the next 20, 30 years. Like I said, they do already have lore, and it's much better in Original Sin 1 and 2. They get a little bit more into it, a little bit deeper, but when you compare it to, like, let's say The Witcher lore or Elder Scrolls Tamriel, or of course Forgotten Realms, Baldur's Gate 3, Forgotten Realms, you'll never be able to get on the level of Forgotten Realms in terms of the amount of lore in the history, because that has been worked on since Ed Greenwood invented it in the 60s. But I want Divinity to be on the level of like the big RPG franchises that we have, and I want it to be a world that people can do research on for potentially hundreds of hours. And hopefully this Divinity game is where this is truly established and Larian really becomes a player in the world building space for RPGs. Now they can do this in a ton of different ways. They can have characters that explain lore to us, really interesting characters. We can be picking up books in the game that explain things on a much deeper level than previous games have and really clear things up and establish things. There's a lot of environmental lore world building they can do with this next Divinity game, and I think it would be awesome. Not to mention, I think it would be super cool. I don't know if they had some authors write some books in the Divinity franchise. I think they have some graphic novels right now, but actual novels based on Divinity before Divinity actually releases, kind of like you see Exodus doing with Peter F. Hamilton. It would be so cool to have some real books to get into for Divinity. Hire a really famous fantasy writer, have him come in here, clean things up, add to it, and man, that would add so much excitement. And it would, oh God, thinking of that would just... If they did that, I'd be so happy. There is a ton of lore that needs to be established that I think that they should focus on, and it will really make a big difference for this next game. The history of the elves, the history of the dwarves, dragons, they're this creation race. We don't really know too much about them. Red dragons, all sorts of stuff, which if we could learn deeper information on these subjects would really increase the world building value of this next Divinity game. And now on to what I would consider a greedy request from myself and others, because I of course understand if Larian doesn't do this, and that is asking for a Game Master mode for the next Divinity game. So those of you guys that don't know what a Game Master mode is, Larian had it in Original Sin 2. Not sure if they had it in Original Sin 1. They did not do it with Baldur's Gate 3, most likely for licensing reasons. It probably would have been a nightmare. And also the fact that BG3 was by far the biggest project Larian has ever taken on, so they probably didn't feel like they had the time or resources to do it, even if they didn't have to deal with Wizards of the Coast. But a Game Master mode is basically like a create your own campaign editor type mode where you can go in and like work on a map and place NPCs and color things and do all sorts of things and then actually experience that. It's kind of like you're creating your own game within the game using Larian's assets. Now modders of course have ways of doing this, but I mean for the average person it's quite complex to even think about trying to do that, and Game Master modes just allow a much easier way for more people to consider making their own custom campaigns. And I think it would be so cool for Larian's next Divinity game, especially considering that all the experience that Larian has now and all the resources, I feel like, and the fact that Divinity is their own IP, I feel like they could create definitely the best Game Master mode that we've ever seen in the history of video games. I think they could do that, and it would add so much to the longevity and an extra part of Divinity, aside from the main campaign and everything, that so many players like myself could, mess around with or also experience other people's creations. Do it, Larian, do it! And to end the video, my last request here isn't gameplay feature focused, so that's why I'm saving it for last, but that is that Larian... That sounded like an alien. Larian continues on with the panel from Hell shows that they did for Baldur's Gate 3's lead up. I want them to do that for Divinity as well. I think it's probably I would say almost guaranteed that they're going to do something like that, but I hope that they do something similar to what they did with the panel from hell. So those of you guys that weren't with us for the build up to Baldur's Gate 3's launch, every like 3-4 months or so, 5 months, Larian would do a big show. Sometimes they'd rent out a castle. They would all role play and dress up. They would play Baldur's Gate 3 in its purest form and just show us it and talk to us and put on concerts and shows for us while talking about the game. They did such a good job with these shows, and they're clearly such a strong display of passion out of the studio, and of course the owner Sven Vinka, and it would go a long way if they did something similar for this next game. I think that the Panel from Hell name would work for the next Divinity game as well, even though it's different lore. And the more I think about it, Larian named their YouTube channel, their community YouTube channel, the Larian Channel from Hell. Now I think they did this with more in mind than just Baldur's Gate 3, because this next Divinity game, we know it's focused on this Hellstone thing that they've been talking about. It appears to be very hell-focused, different lore, but hell-focused nonetheless, and demon-focused and stuff like that. I think they named it that so it could encompass not only Baldur's Gate 3, but their next game. So I think they've known for a while what they're going to be doing. But bring back the Panel from Hells. It would be an absolute joy. And of course, if they do that, you know, I'll be watching them all here live on my channel as well. Man, Baldur's Gate 3's build-up was almost... it might have been even more fun than when the game actually came out. I want them to do that for this next game as well, because I think it goes a long way in building a community.